The Dark Empath. Getting it wrong again. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. This channel is in its infancy, and as you know, I created this sister channel to focus on narcissism and psychopathy, leaving the celebrity analyses and the interviews and all the other stuff of that ilk to the Ultra channel, and for here to be more serious with regard to the examination of the topics. Thus, political narcissists will be found here, criminal narcissists will be found here, and of course I'll be utilising my extensive catalogue of work also. Whilst this channel is in its infancy, it's more important than ever to ensure that people are directed to it. And the people that can achieve that are you, my valuable viewers. The more that you share my work, the more that you talk about my work, the more that you provide links to it, the better, so that the channel can grow and the algorithm pushes this, so that this becomes the actual resource for people to understand about narcissism and psychology, rather than turning to alternative sources which have become popular, albeit misleading. And I'm going to provide you with another example of how that causes a problem, whilst enabling you to understand more about narcissists and empaths. This is the concept of the dark empath. An article written by Anita Chowdhury has appeared in The Guardian, which is a serious newspaper, left-leaning newspaper in the United Kingdom. The article explains, it isn't every day that psychologists identify a hot new character archetype. Human design doesn't usually generate media stories about the most talked about personality trait for autumn-winter, and yet something close to this is unfolding with the current fascination with so-called dark empaths. On TikTok, unfortunately, this platform again, or TikTok as I call it, given its propensity to share a lot of rubbish, the term has been trending with more than 2.6 million mentions. There's even a dark empath talk hashtag. All the better to locate the latest videos with ominous titles such as When an Empath Goes Dark and The Most Dangerous Personality. A measure of how far the idea has travelled is that when I mentioned the phrase to my hairdresser, he helpfully explained, oh yes, they're the ones who are like narcissists, only more devious. That encapsulates the lack of understanding about the concept of the dark empath. I have created videos about this beforehand, and therefore I'll cut to the chase. The dark empath is just a narcissist. Nothing more, nothing less. It is not an empath that is devious. Empaths can be devious, of that there is no doubt, but routinely they are not. They're not designed that way. Their emotional empathy hinders them from doing so. And the concept of the dark empath is the idea that you have somebody that has empathy, but is also manipulative with it. The only character, the only personality type that will exhibit some form of empathy but is devious and manipulative again and again and again is a narcissist with cognitive empathy. And the idea of there being a dark empath is misleading because it's wholly incorrect. Empaths have emotional empathy. They operate in a way whereby their day-to-day behaviour is governed by that emotional empathy. Doesn't mean that they're saints, as I repeatedly point out. It means they operate with empathic traits shrouding the narcissistic traits, but an external stressor can reduce that emotional empathy, causing the narcissistic traits to come to the fore so that they act in a less than empathic way. There are lots of different external stresses that can cause that. But empaths are not Machiavellian. They're not routinely devious. They are not programmed to manipulate. They don't pursue the prime aims. And therefore, to suggest that there is a devious empath, one that is wholly manipulative but does so with emotional empathy, is misleading. All you're doing is rebadging mid-range and greater narcissists. The article explains that dark empaths were first identified in a 2021 study published in the journal Personality and Individual Differences. Researchers defined it as a novel psychological construct, except it isn't, concerning individuals who have a high degree of empathy, it's only cognitive, it's not emotional, alongside what's known as dark traits. How this plays out in practice is someone who appears to be caring and sensitive, but who's actually using those skills to further their own agenda. In other words, what is that? It's a narcissist, or possibly a psychopath. Somebody who appears to be caring and sensitive, that is not an empath. Why? Because the empath doesn't appear to be caring and sensitive, they are. The individual that creates the appearance of being caring and sensitive is either a narcissist in the pursuit of the prime aims or a psychopath utilizing that with regard to the pursuit of the necessary triad. The article explains, or rather asks this question, but how is it possible to manufacture empathy? Well, again, an empath doesn't manufacture empathy. Narcissists do. Psychopaths do. Can't we as humans detect when that is being done? It turns out there is more than one type of empathy. The deeply caring type most of us understand is called affective empathy, the real thing, which is just another word for emotional empathy. It's the degree to which I feel what you are feeling, says Nadia Hiem, co-author of the research study and associate professor in personality psychology and psychopathology at Nottingham Trent University. Or in other words, what she's referring to is contagion empathy, which is a form of emotional empathy. And if you'd like to understand that, watch my videos about contagion empathy. So, for example, when you feel sad, that makes me feel sad. But there's another type known as cognitive empathy. In that case, the script is, I know what you're thinking, I understand your mental state, but I really don't care about it. And this information is important to the dark empath, because if they want to predict your behaviour, they need to understand what you're thinking in order to control you. It is this manipulation by stealth that can feel so unnerving if you are on the receiving end of it. In other words, you're dealing with a narcissist or you're dealing with a psychopath. There's no such thing as a dark empath. Yasmin works in event management. It was a very social vibe, and Elaine, the new boss, liked to treat us to a Friday afternoon drinks tolly, aka a few bottles of fizz being passed around the desks. The evening would often end in the pub. Soon, her boss started to share confidences about her personal life, prompting Yasmin to reveal her struggles in trying to get pregnant. It felt great that my boss was also becoming a good friend and mentor and made office life enjoyable. Things started to go wrong when Elaine confided about how stress was taking its toll on her health. She frequently asked Yasmin to take on extra tasks. I was happy to help her out, knowing what pressure she was under from management. She'd also hinted a promotion was in the offing for me, promised gain, but then she embarked upon a not-so-subtle campaign to try and put me off the idea of starting a family. She'd tell me that, age 35, I still had loads of time, and didn't I want to prioritise my career and future earnings first? It's only with hindsight that I realise what an outrageous boundary overstep, lack of boundary recognition, this was. At the time, I genuinely thought she was looking out for me. A few months later, Yasmin discovered she was finally pregnant. I was nervous about telling Elaine, but I wasn't expecting such an extreme reaction. She went ballistic and started screeching. How could you do this to me, after all I've done for you? Words that you'll often hear from the narcissist, of course. How can you do this to me? Victim mentality, after all I've done for you. Perceived martyrdom. After that, she excluded me from meetings, isolation, and when the much talked about promotion was advertised, no surprise, I didn't even make the shortlist. Of course, I could have gone to HR, but what would that have achieved? I never wanted to work with a woman again and transferred to another department, which is a sensible move, before my daughter was born, but I'm still annoyed with myself for having trusted her. Unfortunately, dark empaths, no, narcissists, are extremely good at getting their prey to drop their defences. They intellectually assemble an understanding of the other person's weaknesses, where their loyalties might lie, and what their insecurities are, explains Wendy Bahari, therapist and author of Disarming the Narcissist. Well, if she actually understands narcissism, she wouldn't be referring to dark empaths. They crave this knowledge because they can then use it to manipulate. For example, in a romantic relationship, say the dark empath knows that their wife derives a lot of pride from the workplace achievements and how she's viewed professionally. She gets an amazing job. That means the dark empath will feel at risk of potentially losing her to other people. Who is it that feels the threat of losing somebody to other people? The narcissist, not the dark empath. He will lose the spotlight. Who wants the spotlight? The narcissist, not the dark empath, and potentially the right to make all of the decisions. Her success at work is making her feel special, and he is losing his power over her. So in this scenario, he would typically scheme to bring the person down. He might say things like, I know how important it is for you to show up for work looking the part, but when you wear that dress, you look like mutton dressed as lamb. I'm very surprised. I thought you would know better. It's all about shaming, or in other words, belittlement. Control through clothing. Like their close relative, the narcissist, it isn't a close relative, it is the same thing. Dark empaths are territorial. According to Bahari, it is common for such types to create exclusion from friends, family and co-workers, i.e. what narcissists do. Isolation means you are more than likely to doubt yourself, and the dark empath can make you rethink and distort your reality, i.e. the narcissist. So it's another form of gaslighting, which is a manipulation by the narcissist. You can only really successfully do that if you have an extremely good sense of another person's vulnerabilities, which of course is what narcissists look out for. One reason why there's so much interest in these types of people is because they present us with a puzzle, good and evil wrapped up in the same package. No, it's not. Good and evil are perspectives, and ultimately aren't particularly useful. But what you're looking at is essentially evil, if we're going to use that term, pretending to be good. It isn't somebody who is good one minute and evil the next. They are intrinsically evil, but they are behaving in a good way. For instance, I do good through the provision of this information, through my consultations, but it's all self-serving. I don't do it because I've got emotional empathy. I do it because it serves the prime aims and the necessary triad. Get this for an example. At the most diabolical level, a dark empath might show up in the form of a Jimmy Savile type. How fucking ridiculous to suggest that Jimmy Savile is a dark empath. That just demonstrates that this concept is errant hogwash and is just talking about narcissists and psychopaths. His skill in winning people's trust, posing as a charitable benefactor, allowed him to gain access to vulnerable young girls. Yes, that is what a narcissist or a psychopath would do. They go on to state, we identify dark empathy as a trait combination displayed by 19.3% of the 1,000 people we surveyed, says Hiem. So almost 1 in 5 of us have this personality type. In actual fact, what you're looking at is it's closer to the 1 in 12 that I've talked about with regard to narcissists. An election candidate pretending to listen to constituents' problems in order to win votes is just one example of normalised dark empathy. No, it's not. That could just be an individual doing that because they recognise that it's an appropriate way to behave. It is cognitive empathy. It could be a narcissist engaging in the utilisation of cognitive empathy, but we don't know what type of person they are because we haven't examined all of their behaviours to make a determination. But to describe it as normalised dark empathy is making it sound like something that it's not. It could also be the neighbour who always has time for a chat, but only because they want to extract gossip from you, or the frenemy who eagerly pumps you for information about all your problems, all the better to boost their own sense of superiority. Now, these examples aren't necessarily narcissists, and describing them as dark empaths is not even going with their own definition. They've talked about the dark empath as basically a devious empath. Well, just because somebody chats to you because they want to extract gossip from you, that's not especially devious. A normal person could behave that way because a normal person could be self-absorbed in that respect, or a narcissistic individual. So again, this suggestion, this article, is all over the place and really is not helpful with regard to this concept of the dark empath. It talks about the frenemy who eagerly pumps you for information about all of your problems, all the better to boost their own sense of superiority. Again, most likely to be done by a narcissist. Our study focused on the general population and high empathy, combined with the prevalence of what we call maladaptive personality traits of the Dark Triad, explains Hiem. The Dark Triad sounds like it could be the title of a schlocky horror franchise. What exactly is meant by the term? There are 3 main traits involved, says Hiem: psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. In some people, those traits overlap in a dark core. Think of it as a rather unsettling Venn diagram. One of the things that makes a dark empath so difficult to identify is that most of us aren't on the lookout for fake compassion. Again, fake compassion is exhibited not by the dark empath, it is exhibited by the narcissist. Shona met Ian at their local running club. I was a newbie, unfit and overweight. He was so encouraging and supportive. He seemed a little shy with a gentle manner. I trusted him. Ian mentioned how much money he had raised for charity, his volunteering at food banks, and how he used to coach a junior football team. Soon, they became a couple and everything was great. But after just a few weeks, Shona began to feel uneasy about him. One evening, we met up and I was upset because my grandmother had been taken to hospital. Ian was saying all the right words, but there's something disengaged about him. I caught a glimpse of his face when he thought I wasn't looking, and his expression was one of disdain. I thought maybe I just imagined it, but there were other signs of something else not being quite right. He was always so keen to present himself as this caring person. But then one evening I came home to find him subjecting a delivery driver to an angry tirade. It worried me. Then, one day, another woman at the club took her aside. She didn't say much, just that she'd also been involved with Ian until he dropped her for someone else, another runner at the club. It emerged that he had a well-known pattern of hitting on new female members, often keeping several on the go at the same time. Honestly, he was the least likely Lothario you could ever imagine, and it was precisely because of that he was able to cheat on so many women. I broke up with him, and he was outraged. I also learned that most of the good deeds he talked about were total fiction. That is not a dark empath. That is a narcissist. An individual who's acted with a sense of entitlement, who has portrayed a facade and a veneer for the purposes of control and drawing fuel, one that has multiple intimate partners, one that cheats, thus demonstrating an absence of emotional empathy, one that shows heated, ignited fury with the tirade to the delivery driver. The various indicators of a narcissist, and yet this article and this concept wraps it up as a dark empath, making it sound like Ian actually has genuine goodness alongside being unpleasant. It is wholly wrong. The article continues by explaining it can sometimes be easier to spot a dark empath in a romantic or friendship relationship than a workplace one, suggests Hiem. Usually there is less to gain in personal relationships, so the dark empath doesn't bother masking their lack of empathy to the same degree, i.e. they're a narcissist. That said, there are some telltale signs to look out for if you have doubts about someone, whatever the context. Pay attention to whether they are using kindness and sympathy to gain something, i.e. false compassion, pity play, which is utilised by narcissists. Is there an ulterior motive? Have you seen evidence that they are capable of being ruthless towards others? Or are they maybe more antagonistic than you would normally expect someone to be? Do they always make you feel guilty when things don't go according to plan? It can also be a good idea to watch how the person treats others. This personality type prefers to meet people one-on-one, i.e. that's what the narcissist prefers because of the monopolization of time and how it's easy to control you one-on-one. So pay attention to what they tell you and how they interact with transient connections such as those with waiters, cab drivers, etc. Also, even if you don't meet their friends, listen carefully to how they talk about them. Are they quite choosy in terms of who they are friendly with? And is there maybe an underlying motive? Do they make jokes at the expense of others? Belittlement. Are they only nice to some people and mean to others? Black and white thinking. In this data-driven culture, we are increasingly required to evaluate other people on paper before meeting them, both in love and at work. All the more reason, then, to take your time evaluating someone you don't know. That is sensible advice. It can take ages to know if you're dealing with a dark empath. No, it can take ages to know if you're dealing with a narcissist. The more time you spend with them, the more aware you will be of their oddities, and then you need to think about it. Is this something you can deal with? Can you live with the behaviour, or is it problematic? Poor advice. If you've identified that you're dealing with a narcissist, you go so. Once you know, you go, you get out and stay out. Psychotherapist Charlotte Fox Weber believes that self-help tropes popularized by social media might have made things easier for dark empaths to operate. Sometimes dark empathy is connected to this whole prevalence of imposter syndrome. That used to be a groundbreaking, helpful term, but now it's changing to people signaling fake vulnerability. Ooh, I don't feel good enough. Everyone else feels like they belong, but not me. Subtext, you can totally trust me. And again, that may well be something that a narcissist would engage in. Another related tactic, Fox Weber says, is to pretend to be a saintly person, the overwhelming angel, middle range type A. I'm always super wary of someone who tells me their problem is overgiving. That's a tell for me. Look out for people who are constantly getting weirdly involved in the details and scenarios of other people's lives. Lack of boundary recognition. You never know if they might be plotting to use the information to bring the other person down, or at the very least sustain their own sense of superiority. After researching this topic, the journalist writes, I did find myself wondering whether labels such as psychopath, narcissist and dark empath serve any useful function. Being an armchair psychologist may be enjoyable when discussing the antics of public figures such as Donald Trump or the Menendez brothers, but when it comes to analysing the people in our own lives, is it a good idea to generate so much suspicion? It's true that some of these terms are totally overused and misused, says Fox Weber. Take narcissism. It used to be a thing that only Greek mythologists would mention, then therapists, but then that said, I think that dark empath as a term does serve a useful function. It reminds us that incredible sensitivity and insensitivity can coexist, except they can't. Incredible sensitivity is false. It's not genuine. The insensitivity isn't. The fact is, the term dark empath should be done away with. It is simply describing the behavior of a narcissist. And what it does is it causes people to think that that behavior is something less than the narcissist, that there is genuine good alongside genuine evil, for want of a better description. And it's misleading. Accordingly, this journalist has thought that the term dark empathy might be of some use. It's good that something like this is being mentioned and talked about in a national newspaper such as The Guardian, but it's unfortunate that it gives credence to the concept of the dark empath, which is an entirely misleading one. I've highlighted the ways that it's just simply talking about a narcissist, in some instances possibly a psychopath. And therefore it would be beneficial for you to share the link to this video on other sites, perhaps where dark empath is being used, so that that term is shown for what it is, just another description for a narcissist. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.